I came to India to find and photograph one species, the Bengal tiger. In the last episode, we visited Bandhavgarh National Park, where tiger sightings were good, but not great. Now we were headed to our next tiger destination 4 hours away, Kanha National Park. We would be staying at Kanha Earth Lodge, another one of Pug Dundee's amazing properties. There was no safari on arrival day, but a serene outdoor dinner under the stars made up for it. The next day, we were out before dawn to be one of the first into the park. Like Bandhavgarh, everyone has to queue up before the gate opens, which can lead to some long lines in the mornings. But before we knew it, we were off to the races and in search of tigers in the Mookie zone. I had a lot riding on my trip to Kanha, and was praying that we would have more luck than I had had with tigers in Bandhavgarh. But after only 20 minutes in the park, we turned around a corner and found a tiger, completely unbothered, laying right next to the side of the road. This tiger was actually a subadult female cub of the famous tigress DJ. While mom was nowhere to be found, the cub more than made up for it. She posed perfectly, showing off her impressive muscles and giving me my best tiger photos of my entire India trip. What I hadn't noticed in the nearby tall grass was her brother, and she crossed the road to join him there. The Kanha grasslands made for a great backdrop for the two cats as they moved around for different types of photos. Eventually the cubs made their way to a nearby waterhole, which gave them relief from the increasingly hot central Indian sun. This waterhole was man-made, so it had large dirt mounds surrounding it that made for a decent vantage point for the tigers. Some spotted deer began to approach the water, completely unaware that the tigers were watching them intently. The female cub began to stalk, but there was no way that she could reach the deer from her position without being spotted. But she still posed for photos, which was great for me at least. Unfortunately, it was time for us to leave the park, but wow, what an incredible start we had already had. One morning in Kanha had eclipsed all the sightings that I had had in Bandhavgarh. Later that afternoon, we headed into Kisli zone, and I was eager to see what was in store for us. Kanha has a very different landscape compared to the other parks, with large forests of sal tree dominating all around. Personally, I quite liked it because it meant wildlife sightings were generally more out in the open, like this miniature barking deer. As a photographer, getting clean shots of wildlife is all I can ask for. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, a tigress slinking her way through the jungle. Tiger sightings are usually so brief, so I mainly focused on stills instead of videos. But just around the road, we found this female subadult male cub who was lounging next to a man-made waterhole in the last minutes of light. It goes to show how massive tigers are, when even the subadults look this big. The next day we were back at it again, except today we would be back in Mookie Zone for the morning. It started off rather slowly compared to the first day, with virtually no signs of tigers anywhere. We spotted some forest department workers on elephant back near the road and flagged them down to ask if they had seen anything. Even though these weren't wild elephants, it was still really cool to be right up next to them. But sadly, nobody had seen any tigers yet. Then, around the corner, we stumbled across a male tiger who was blind in one eye, who gave us one look before heading back into the jungle. Tiger sightings happen so quickly, you have a matter of moments with them before they're gone. Kanha had been quiet, with that brief tiger sighting and a few spotted deer being all we had seen. We checked out the waterhole where we had seen the cubs yesterday, and we found them again laying in the water. One of the cubs even went for a little swim, and I grabbed some nice shots from the sighting. That afternoon, we were back to Kisli Zone. We found some gore and more spotted deer. But otherwise, the afternoon drive was a bust. It goes to show how hot and cold looking for tigers can be. Sometimes you find them everywhere, and sometimes you strike out completely. We were out early again the next morning, because this time we were headed to Kanha Zone at last. Right out of the gate, we found a female tigress on the move in the tall grass. This is Neelam, one of the dominant females of the zone, who seemed quite content keeping her distance from the crowd of vehicles that started to show up. Unfortunately, she never got closer, and disappeared into the forest shortly thereafter. We moved on and found some of Kanha's black buck, who had been reintroduced to the park in 2011 and 2017. Then, out in the distance, we saw a black shape moving across the landscape. It was a sloth bear, one of the most rare animals to find on an Indian safari. Tigers won't hesitate to kill sloth bears, so finding them in a place with a high density of tigers can be extremely difficult. This sloth bear was hungry and on the lookout for a meal from a nearby termite mound. He would scratch and claw at it to try and break through to the insects, which make up a large part of their diet. He would get closer and closer to the road, but the vegetation didn't give me a clean shot. Finally, he got comfortable enough to cross, and I managed to get some outstanding photos from the brief encounter. Later that afternoon, we were headed to one of the buffer zones, since it was a Wednesday, which meant that the core zones were closed. I didn't expect any tigers here, so I tried to focus on other animals, like the Indian roller. Buffer zones border nearby human settlements, meaning that tigers are usually found here less often because they try to avoid people. We saw a few different species of antelope here and there, but it was turning into another quiet drive. We checked every possible tiger location and were about to give up when suddenly we had the greatest sighting of my India trip. A tigress walking down the road. We were the only vehicle around, which meant that she didn't feel pressured by our presence and was relaxed enough to continue staying on the road. This is what I had dreamed of in India. A tiger walking head-on towards us and without a single vehicle in sight. After we left the tiger and headed out, we came across an Indian leopard. Sadly too far for photos, but amazing to see nonetheless. The next morning, we were treated to non-stop thunderstorms. The downpour was relentless, and I had a feeling that this drive was going to be a bust because we used all of our luck up the night before. I did manage to find the herd of blackbuck again, which was a nice sighting, as well as a very wet kingfisher bouncing up and down on a rock. And Barasinga, a deer species which Kanha is most famous for. Evidently not a tiger safari, but I did snap some photos of these other animals that I was happy with. And somehow, just like that, my time in Kanha had come to an end, and it was back to civilization. And then on a plane, back home. Thank you all so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and follow me on social media for more. India had been phenomenal to me, with special sightings in Bandhavgarh and Kanha, which I know will make me eager to return someday.